So many people are old friends here that when they sit next to each other, they haven't seen each other in years, and now they're going to speak together. So welcome everyone. We're going to try and stay on time as much as possible today. We have a full day of events, and so I'm just going to take care of housekeeping. My name is Gary Baracco, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing from EC Vision. And so I'll be your MC throughout the day. We will also have microphones. Besides this microphone, we'll grab another microphone for Q&A at any point during the day. If you have questions, you want to jot them down, you can hand them to me. Then if you feel a little shy and you don't want to approach the speaker, then I'll go ahead and blurt out your comment and take care of that for you. The restrooms are actually located outside the door to the left, behind the booths. I'd like to thank our sponsors, and Thomas will point out them further, but please take your time and visit the booths. When it comes time for lunch, also, you'll note that some people had to move to a different room, so if you have a red tag, you'll go to the primary lunch area, which is the Felix, and then the alternate is the Nathan, okay? So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our CEO of EC Vision, Thomas Ng.
I'm gonna stand up here because I got a couple of slides. Otherwise, I would like to do what Gary does. Anyway, but good morning, everyone. I think I'm seeing a lot of friends from the U.S. and even from Japan. And I don't know if you know, we originally had this event. We thought about 70 people or so, and it turned out to be over 100. And I think my hypothesis is that the reason is there's all the bad weather in these countries. People would rather come here to do anything to get out of those countries, and Hong Kong is not a bad place, right? So welcome you all to SourceTrend 2014. I've been asked, this is our first event, and hopefully first of many annual event. And I've been asked by people saying that, why SourceTrend? Why are we doing SourceTrend? Well, the thing that I've been working with sourcing industry, supply chain industry for over 15 years. Many people of you in your room work with directly. Basically, one thing that I noticed is that back when we first started, there were problems with cross stocks, there were problems with labels, and then people looking at whip tracking or doing materials. And every year it seems like there are some new trends, right? And when we were trying to gather people around the industry, we were thinking, well, one of the things that, of course, when we thought about this last year, many of you, well, most of you in this room now because of the topic, many of our customers were very concerned about compliance issues. Not only compliance on safety, but also not on facilities compliance, but also on product safety. And of course, many have expressed interest in looking at what's coming in green area and sustainability. So we said, well, you know what, maybe we should just have an event and gather people around the industry and discuss these issues. It's meant to be something that's more like a dialogue base. And then when we were looking, after we've done that, we said, all these changes, it's really making it that we think we should do it every year, but a different topic. So basically what will happen is that, this year we'll focus on compliance, and next year we'll focus on a different topic, but very topic specific, so that we can get a more focused dialogue together and really trying to get everyone, to really find out more about what's going on. And one thing that, when we do this event on this year about compliance, I think, since most of you are the experts, we're not, we're glad to be able to get our sponsors here, our sponsoring organizations, especially AFA, FDRA, SFBC, and RAP, and also Sita, and also some of the labs here. I can't mention all of them by names, but too many names to be mentioned. But basically, without them, we can't get this room together, and without that participation, I think people would not be as interested. But before I welcome our speaker, I do, because we are the hosting organization, I was told that I get 2 minutes to do an advertisement about our company, so I'll do that. So basically, most of you probably, many of you don't know EasyVision, some of you do. We are a leader in providing supply chain collaboration platform. Basically, our solutions spans from, what we call concept to delivery, or in our case, innovation planning to commercialization to make and ship. And basically, what we try to do is provide a cloud platform where the retail brands can basically share information and do transactions with the supply chain partners. Okay, so that was the 2 minute or 1 minute. Moving on, I'm very honored and very glad to introduce our next opening speaker, Spencer Phone. He's the Group Chief Operating Officers of Li & Fong, and I met Spencer a few years ago at a luncheon event with Victor and with Victor Phone and William and also Spencer. And one thing that I always want to do, get him an opportunity to help us and talk about events. Since he spent so much time around the world, he came back from Europe a couple of years ago. And he's now the executive director. I just want to make sure I got it right, so I have a cheat sheet here. He's the executive director at Li & Fong, and he also was heading European distribution business. Spencer has a degree from Harvard and also an MBA from Northeastern, and he is, of course, runs many associations and also sits on the chair of the board of Li & Fong. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Spencer to be the opening speaker for us. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. First of all, a belated Kong Hei Fa Choi. And for those who are not from Hong Kong, Chinese New Year is one of the best festivals we have because we get a lot of red packets with goodies inside. So I always look forward to this time of the year. I want to thank Thomas and EasyVision for inviting me here to speak. I'm very excited to be here today, but I'm also very humbled by the crowd here and the panels of experts we have and the topics we have today, because I definitely cannot, I confess that I'm not a profession, in compliance and sustainability. I think if there are any detailed questions, I have to defer that back to my own staff. What I want to do today is really just to share my own sort of feelings and experience with you and what the company has been doing in the field of compliance and sustainability over the past many years, the past actually century. Just a little bit about myself. I am from Hong Kong. I grew up here, and I spent a lot of time in the US and lived all around the world. I started as a CPA, Certified Public Accountant in PwC. And then I moved on to Silicon Valley in a very exciting place to be an entrepreneur, doing e-commerce. And then about 12 years ago, I joined Li & Fong, the family business. I'm the fourth generation in the company. And I've done US, Europe. I've lived in Europe, hard goods, soft goods, a little bit of compliance, a little bit of sustainability. And now I'm the group COO of the company. Today's topic is the changing supply chains and the role of sustainability. I think if I look at the industry that we're all in, it's retail, supply chain, consumer products, starting from the 1900s, or starting from the whole Industrial Revolution, when people invented, the sewing machine, the factory, created a new environment for people to work in. All of a sudden, you can mass produce consumer products. And all of a sudden, dozens, hundreds, thousands of people started working under one roof. All this started in the US, in the UK, Germany, Italy, all the, the industrialized countries at those times. Nobody talked about compliance. Nobody talked about sustainability. It was just a new place to work, a new place to produce, and it was just something novel. And then as time passed, people realized that going to work can be a little bit dangerous. occasional fires, occasional accidents, and conditions got worse year after year, pollution, you name it. It wasn't until people realized the first problem that they start putting down the first rule. Oh, there's a fire. Unfortunately, somebody actually lost their lives. From now on, let's make sure that the fire exits. There's an accident. Somebody lost a finger. And then the first rule started. Okay, from now on, you need a protective device in front of the machine. And then year after year after year, because of issues, new issues that came up, people started setting standards, compliance standards, sustainability standards, a code of conduct, manuals, and so on. As things sort of evolved and progressed, in the 50s and 60s, production started to move to Asia. I think Hong Kong here was one of the first beneficiaries of this sort of wave of movement, if you will, global movement of production and supply chain. For those of you who are not from here, Hong Kong was basically built on immigrants from China. When China became communist, everybody moved here. A lot of industrialists, they moved here and set up factories here. That became the heart of Hong Kong, moving us up the economic ladder, if you will. Factories started, Cheung Wan, Kwun Tong, and so on. That's where we're based in Cheung Wan. And then again, the same sort of evolution went on. People started working in the factory. People started realizing that, there are issues in working in the factories, pollutions, all of that, the same set of issues, and then it sort of evolved. Obviously, today is no longer an issue. Production got expensive and moved country to country to country, from Hong Kong to Taiwan to Korea, Singapore, you name it. And the latest, obviously, trend is the movement to places like Bangladesh, Cambodia, Laos, Ethiopia, you name it. Every single country wanting to move up the economic ladder actually went through the same sort of evolution, starting from simple manufacturing of a t-shirt and then moving up. And as they go through these evolution, they realize that, compliance and sustainability is important. Now, when we, especially buyers and retailers from the West go to a new country, we already have a very set way of doing things, because of 100 years of, let's say 100 years of experience, right? We have a manual this thick. We know exactly what to do. There's like hundreds of points, audits, checklists, and so on. For a new country like Bangladesh, this is really just an opportunity to get out of poverty. Bangladesh, I think I was told back in the 70s or even earlier, was dismissed as a sort of a lost cause in the world. There's no way that Bangladesh can ever move up the economic ladder. But slowly but surely, manufacturing started, and then people's lives improved. Minimum wage and work opportunity, export orders. This is going to lead to a service industry coming up, domestic consumption, and so on. For that country, being able to engage in manufacturing is a privilege. Something to move up the economic ladder and improve their lives. For us, and for buyers, and mostly from the Western world, it's not a sort of the best conditioned country to work in. So there's a clash. It's almost like a cultural clash. But through the efforts of everyone in the industry around the world, between the end consumers, the retailers, the agents, the suppliers, and so on, things are improving slowly but surely. So this is sort of how the whole industry and the supply chain has evolved in the past 100 years, in my mind at least. And then if you look at compliance in specific, I remember when I first started in this industry, which was only 12 years ago. I think a lot of you here have been here longer than I have. I remember everybody was talking about social compliance. At that time, I had no idea what it was. I was just learning from scratch. Social compliance, minimum wage, working hours, child labor, prison labor, and so on. That was the hot topic. A couple years later, it became environmental compliance. A couple years later, the word sustainability started popping up. That became the buzzword. And of course, in the past year and a half, because of what happened in Bangladesh, the fire in Tazreen, the factory collapse in Rana Plaza, now worker safety is the latest sort of trend. So as things sort of moved on, new buzzwords, new trends started coming up, and now is worker safety. Throughout this whole sort of development in the last century, I think one thing that has stayed constant is sort of how we, as a company, look at compliance and sustainability. I think since the founding of the company, by my great-grandfather to my grandfather to my father, we've always sort of placed sustainability, if you will. There was no such word in the heart of our in our own hearts. I remember when I first started in the company about 12 years ago, we had a huge compliance team. Our customers were always asking us, why do you have hundreds of people in compliance? Right? Why do you do that? Can't you just do an audit, get it checked? If there are problems, you do corrective action, blah, blah, blah. And I found out very quickly that compliance has been sort of in our DNA for a long time. Since the 90s, before a lot of our customers were talking about compliance, we already had a huge sort of investment and department in this area. And then throughout the 2000s, we also continued to overinvest in this area. Getting the right people in place, getting the support from the top, all the way from the chairman, making the right investment, and really, investing, for the future, if you will. Our company runs on what we call these 3-year plans. The last 3-year plan was 2011, 12, and 13. One of the main pillars of our last 3-year plan was sustainability. Going forward, one of the main pillars will continue to be sustainability. So this is an area that, the company has sort of invested and overinvested in, if you will, for a long time, and we will continue to do so. Our philosophy in the company is that, sustainability and compliance really starts from within yourself. I don't know which country it's from, but there's a saying that, if you have to get your sort of own house in order before you can change or influence anybody else. So getting yourself, tuned into the world of sustainability, getting your own people tuned in, involving them, working on sustainability efforts within the our office, our 4 walls, engaging our people, engaging the communities that they're involved in, and then you start engaging your partners like our retail customers and our suppliers. So this is sort of our general philosophy. So corporate strategy, first of all, is our responsibility. What can we do to enhance the sustainability of our operations? Partnerships. After you have done that yourself, what can you do to support, for example, we as an agent, our customer sustainability strategy? And then extending out to the whole supply chain, in sustainable sourcing, what can we do to advance and promote sustainable sourcing? So this is sort of our general philosophy. And just to show you some of the things that we've done in the past, these are some of the commitments that we made in our last 3-year plan. Be a thought leader in sustainable sourcing. Contribute to the development of our customer sustainability strategy. Reduce carbon emission by 25%. Reduce energy, water, paper. Design and build sustainable offices. Many of our offices around the world are LEED certified. Engage our people to carry out our sustainability strategy. Enhance the health and well-being of our own colleagues, and help build a sustainable community through our people and community and partners. All this is sort of long-term. In order to have a sustainable sort of supply chain, you have to have a very long-term engagement strategy with all the stakeholders inside the supply chain. And, so the goals that I gave you earlier was set in 2011, or 10, end of 2010. I'm glad that Lali is here today. And so by 2012, we have actually achieved a lot of our goals already, reducing carbon by 23%, energy by 19%, water by 2%, paper by 20%, and building, I think, half a dozen of LEED certified offices. Engaging the community that we work in is very important. Li & Fung, today, we operate in more than 60 countries and we have 300 locations. It's very important that we engage the community that we're in. So what we do is try to engage our people to carry out the sustainability strategy, enhancing the health and well-being of the colleagues and the communities that they serve in. One of the things that we have is called the Fung Foundation. The Fung Foundation actually has a fund that supports sort of community outreach and programs. But there's one requirement. We will not donate money just to anything. we have to assist sort of things that our staff cares about. So we want people to actually participate. I think, the minimum requirement is that at least 3 staff are involved in something in the local community. Then we put the money in to help them. So we actually want to engage the staff in order to engage the communities and bring them up as sort of community sort of leaders over time. Couple of things that we do, just for example, Habitat for Humanity, general cleanup, visiting elderly and children with cancer, building schools in Bangladesh, in countries that are in need. Other things that we've done internally in order to get ourselves sort of to the right standards, including getting and maintaining in the major indices, and also working with the UN Global Impact. Now, that's what we were doing internally. Externally, we have to work, of course, with our partners very closely to be a thought leader in sustainable sourcing and contribute to the development of our customers' sustainable strategies by educating our own colleagues first, and then our suppliers and customers on sustainable sourcing alternatives, leading supply chain management, building capacity, sustainable factories, and sustainable sourcing, developing guidelines, and so on. One of the areas recently that we've been very involved in is after the Bangladesh tragedy. There are 2 main organizations that's been set up, is the Alliance and the Accord. And we're actually on the advisory board of both of them. So we're very active in helping out, the whole industry to to bring up the standards, if you will. In order to do that, we have global teams all around the world with hundreds of people, actually just in this area. And this area actually reports directly to the chairman. These are just some examples that we have within the company. We have a website for all our vendors. We're in the business of connecting 15,000 vendors with about 8,000 customers in 100 countries. Every vendor actually have access to what we call a customer portal. A vendor portal. And this vendor portal, incidentally, is powered by EasyVision. That's the core of our engine. And within that, there's access to what we call a sustainability resource center, where you can learn about everything that you ever need to know, well, not ever, that we think is important about sustainability. And this is done in 5 languages, so that local suppliers in local countries can actually access and understand that easily. Supply compliance manual, everyone has one of these. In our manual, we don't just tell people what they have to do, but we actually teach them how to do it. We have regular training sessions to train up the suppliers on how to move up this compliance and sustainability ladder. Engaging suppliers. On the left, you have a fire safety video. On the right, you have a working hours sort of management video. This video is actually done in 13 different languages, and it's been pretty recognized all over the world now. So these are just some examples of what we do to engage the supply chain. I think what I want to say is, the philosophy, the world has been changing, has been evolving, and it will continue to evolve. The role of sustainability and compliance has been evolving every few years, and it will continue to evolve. The latest being sort of an emphasis on worker safety. But I think something that, that is important to us, and I hope is important to everyone, is that, you can wake up every morning and look in the mirror and say, am I doing something right? Something that, would be acceptable by myself. If I'm using a factory that is not totally compliant, what does that mean? Would I send myself, would I send my kids to work in that factory? If somebody has to go and work in a factory and they might die from their job, is that acceptable? Is that sustainable? Obviously not. That's why worker safety now, people looking at electrical safety, building safety, structural issues, this is so important. Nobody should be working in an office where it will collapse, have the risk of collapsing one day. Nobody should. So I think looking yourself in the mirror is really where to start. Am I really living a sustainable life? Are we engaging our own people internally? Are we cleaning up our own house? You start from there, and then you start engaging your external suppliers. I think having a long-term sort of engagement strategy, having a long-term relationship with all the players and all the stakeholders in the supply chain is very important. And creating that sort of sustainable ecosystem in the long run is how we can actually ensure that the supply chain is sustainable in the long run. Thank you very much.
Yes, because you know, this opportunity of having Spencer here, we're you know, I asked Spencer whether he can take some questions, and if any have questions, you know, this is meant, as I said earlier, this is meant to be a dialogue. So the more that you participate, the better I think everybody would get value from. So if there's anyone who have questions, we have some mics around about, you know, generally just about, you know, high level. Change supply chain, high level, right? We understand high level.
Actually, Lottie is here.
Yeah, or anything to do with you know, questions about supply chain. So, Lottie, if you want to come here, that's fine too.
Lottie's my,
yes. So, anyone having any questions related to, you know, some of the high level issues about supply chain and sustainability in general or compliance in general? Anybody? Yes.
Okay. Give me an easy one.
Yeah, Patney.
I know Patney since I was a little kid.
Hi, Spencer. I won't spill any of your childhood secrets, promise. But yeah, thank you for your wonderful presentation and all the work that Li and Feng are doing. One of the questions I'd like to ask is with regards to your engagement further up the supply chain. Is there any, predominantly I think the engagement has been with Tier 1, or has there been moves already to further up the supply chain to Tier 2 and Tier 3, where more of the environmental impacts are there? Thanks.
I would say there is some, and we're definitely moving towards a more Tier 2 engagement. I think what, you know, sort of like the theme of the presentation, we like to first engage our people and then engage the people around us so that everyone will start thinking about sustainability sort of on an everyday sort of level. So we don't have to sort of monitor people on a day-to-day basis, so that our suppliers can even monitor their Tier 2 factories. But of course, it's not easy. We all know that it's not easy to go up Tier 2. We work with 15,000 suppliers. If you look at the Tier 2 level, that number is even more astronomical. But I think everyone is looking at that and making sure that they're engaging more and more at this Tier 2 level. Whether we get a whole comprehensive engagement, I think that is a more longer term sort of goal.
So are you saying that you would expect your Tier 1 suppliers to do more of their own?
Definitely. I think the expectation has always been there, but whether it's been done and monitored properly, that's a little bit different. I think what we believe is that if you build a long-term sustainable supply chain, you know, let's say a supplier, you know, stays in business, becomes more efficient, works with all the players within the supply chain, including ourselves, the customer, and they stay sort of efficient and profitable. Over time, it's in their own interest to actually be monitoring everything that is downstream.
Okay, thank you.
Another question on that side?
Good morning, Spencer, and good morning, everybody. I'm Sumit Dargat from Target. Very nice presentation and good insight into what Li and Feng is doing and how Li and Feng is so focused on sustainability and social compliance. My question is on similar lines as Patney. I would like to know, in terms of environmental compliance, so what is Li and Feng's strategy for environmental compliance in China, especially for the Tier 2 suppliers, which are the fabric mills, because of the dyeing and the finishing and the water pollution. Recently, we all know that China has tightened its standards, and many of the Tier 2 suppliers are facing a lot of challenge to meet those standards. So any insight which Li and Feng has, does it plan to mitigate that risk?
So you're saying that recently you were saying that?
Yes. I'm saying that recently, because of the tightening of the environmental compliance in China, there could be a big impact to the supply chain. So is there any insight you or your team could provide what Li & Fung is doing to mitigate that risk?
I think number one, we're actually very supportive of the government regulations on tightening of environmental compliance in China. I think that's a great move forward, and I think what China does, many other countries follow. So you actually will see that tightening, I think, across the board. We have, I think, maybe perhaps a different scenario than your scenario, which is we have the luxury to some extent of picking and choosing. So where there are tier 2 suppliers that will meet those environmental compliance regulations, they will be preferred suppliers generally to particularly our top 20 customers who are looking for better environmental controls, better environmental regulations at that tier 2 level, particularly at the fabric mills. So what we're seeing is actually an increased demand from our customers for better levels of environmental compliance, coupled with regulations within the countries which are supporting that. And I think that trend is not going to go away in Asia. And I think the quicker the uptake at that tier 2 level will make that supplier base far more competitive to a broader range of retailers, particularly in Europe and then followed by the US. So we're very supportive of it.
Sounds great. Thank you.
And I just want to introduce, Lali, could you introduce yourself to the group?
Certainly. I don't normally crash conferences and
You're welcome.
get to the front of the stage. My name is Lali Kisevi. I'm the Chief Communications Officer and Head of Strategic Engagement at Li & Fung, and I lead the sustainability strategy at the company, and I'm very happy to have Spencer as my partner on that initiative.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
In fact, the whole presentation was prepared by Lali.
Thank you. Spencer, I do have a question. So you talked about evolution and you talked about the history of Hong Kong and sourcing. So can you move us forward in time now? I mean, Li & Fung might have this perspective as what's happening in 2015, 2016 down the road. What do you see are trends that we should really be ready for?
Yeah, if I look at the sourcing trends, throughout the last 40 years, we have been able to welcome sort of the coming in of sort of the introduction of China and all the sort of Southeast Asian and East Asian countries being sort of a new sort of sourcing base year after year. We don't see a lot of new sort of frontiers right now. I mean, all the major sort of sourcing countries are already used and sort of getting mature. There are a couple of new ones, but they're not huge, going to be a huge increase. So I think there will be more stability in the supply chain going forward. And having stability in the supply chain, I think, is one of the first steps of having a more sustainable supply chain. And I also think that, in today's world, I think all of you know the world is truly and 100% transparent. I think in the past, when I first entered the industry, how people looked at compliance was sort of like a necessary roadblock, if you will, to the end, to do the business, right? You need to do the audit, you need to pass it. If there's corrective action, you need to correct it and then do it. But how much do people really feel that compliance is at the top of the agenda? I think right now, because of Bangladesh and everything that has happened, it's really gone up the sort of agenda list and priority list. And because of the transparency that you have in today's world, there's no more gray area that anybody can operate in. It's black or white. You're either compliant or you're not. The sooner that we realize that we're in this world where there's no gray area, the better. And in this world where there's only black and white, you either comply or not. And this will really, I think, will quickly raise the sort of awareness and compliance level generally around the whole world. So that's what I think the future is going to take us, and I think this future will get to us actually a lot quicker than we think.
Great, thank you.
Yes, Spencer, my name is Rich Campanelli. I work for a medium-sized apparel company in California called Fam Brands. We do some business with major retailers, and wonder if you could speak a little bit to, you mentioned the Alliance and the Accord. As it relates to compliance, building safety, fire safety, electrical safety, all these things, it gets very, very complex. Somebody spoke from Target, but Target, JCPenney, certainly Walmart. It's so complicated right now for an importer to try to be to use factories that are compliant with all of these people. I know RAP. Met some people here from RAP. They've done some great work. ILO has done some great work. But could you speak a little bit to where you see this all going in order to bring maybe one or two types of combined compliance instead of trying to be compliant with so many different companies that you deal with? To me, quite frankly, for me, this is the #1 reason that I came here today, because it's very, very complex for a medium-sized company to figure it all out.
Sure. I think because of, going back to the evolution of supply chain and how it's moved from one country to another, and the quota system, tariffs, multilateral trade, bilateral trade agreements, the whole landscape of sourcing supply chain has been complex, and it's becoming more and more complex. And this is really, we've been the sort of recipient of this complexity for the past 100 years. And this is what we do for our customers, navigating through this sort of complexity. In terms of compliance standards, we work with 8,000 customers. Every customer has their own little requirements. Most of them are by and large the same, but everyone wants a little bit of difference. We've been sort of pushing for a more unified standard for many years, but not very successful, because everyone wants their little own manual that is customized. If you ask any suppliers and factories, they have to do multiple audits multiple times a year just to get things going. It's not easy. To me, the alliance and the accord is great, because for the first time in the history of this industry, people are actually working together. There are even talks of the alliance and the accord working closer together. My dream is that the alliance and accord can become one. If you look at, the toy industry, I believe in the early 1990s, had a real big tragedy in Thailand, where a factory fire killed hundreds of people. That prompted the whole toy industry to get together, led by a gentleman called Alan Hasenfeld from Hasbro. And they created, I think, ICTI, in order to sort of get the whole industry and all the big brands together to establish one standard, have a common sort of a supply database that people can sort of use. I believe, from talking to Alan, he told me that was really the defining moment in his industry. People got together, created one standard, and it's worked ever since. Right, ever since that incident, there's not been a major fire in any toy sort of factories that are used by the major brands. I'm hoping that the alliance and the accord, it's already a good step to have two. I'm hoping that could become one, and that would, and create a standard that everybody can use around the world, and getting rid of all that complexity. So that's my hope.
Thank you. And did you have further comment, Lally?
I think in relation to importers, because I think that that's a very niche market that's going to be impacted with what's happening. Spencer's correct in the sense that everything that's happened in the industry post Tazreen and Rana, there's now a new normal, and it's really called transparency right through to the supply chain. And I think that's quite challenging for importers who really didn't have to actually deal with a lot of transparency issues before. On the flip side, much of what's happening in the alliance and the accord is actually driving transparency at the factory level, which in effect is driving, it's the tail wagging the dog. The transparency around the audit findings will probably lead to some kind of normalization or perhaps standardization around the auditing practices. So at the moment, all of the members of the alliance and the accord separately will be able to see each other's factory audit findings. Many of the retailers have taken it to the next step to actually post the factories that they use within their supply chains very openly on public websites. I think we're going to see much more of that in the US, frankly, as a move towards transparency. So at a minimum, you will now have fair information on various retailers' websites to be able to say, this is our factory base, which to some extent very practically means this is the vetted factory base. And you will see much more of a move and probably a demand from your customer base as to your transparency within that supply chain. So I think everyone needs to be prepared for that transparency in one form or another. And I think that will drive a lot of what Spencer's talking about as sort of next stage, hopefully normalization and standardization, once everybody gives up the proprietary audit findings. Okay.
Okay, well, I'm so glad that it's such a good conversation beginning already. This is exactly what this is all about, is for you to have dialogues. So I'd like to thank Spencer and Lila for being able to spend the time here, and I'm sure there'll be, thank you. I'm sure there'll be a, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So we're going to prepare for our next panel. I'll just do some technology shifting here. If you guys want to start coming up. And, as we discussed, an overflow room for a first-time event in Hong Kong is just overwhelming and amazing for us. And it shows that there's so much interest in not just the details, but knowing what's happening and what's changing. So our first panel is going to be moderated by Fabrice. Fabrice is from TÜV Süd. He'll introduce, I'm sure, his company and himself as well. We have Andre Leroy, who is with GAFTI, and Tex Moseri, who is with New Balance. So I'll let you take control of the mouse and go ahead and begin.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the panel session CPSIA and REACH. My name is Fabrice Clark. I'm a Global Business Development Manager at TÜV Süd. So, yeah, can everybody hear me? Okay, 1 second. Okay, does it work now? Okay, so as I was saying, I'm part of TÜV Süd. So as you can see, the blue octagon over here, we're a German-based service provider for quality assurance services and supply chain services with locations in Europe, Asia, and North America. So today you're going to be hearing presentations from Tex Moseri, as Senior Manager Material Sourcing and Global RSL Manager at New Balance, and also from Andre Leroy, Vice Chairman at GAFTI, and Global Compliance Manager at Avery Dennison. So before we get started, there's going to be a Q&A sessions following the second presentation. So if you have any, please hold on to them until then. And so moving on to our first session, I would like to welcome Tex, who will be speaking to us about some of the challenges that New Balance has faced and the measures they've implemented with regards to CPSIA and REACH. Tex, all yours.
Thank you very much, Fabrice. I thought I was going second, so I didn't get my speech ready yet. So I'm going to be talking about CPSI and REACH, and I think everyone in this room has an understanding of what CPSI and REACH means. If you don't, I guess you're in the wrong business if you're in this room. But a bit about what, the two regulations mean, a bit about how New Balance has responded to these regulations, and a bit about some of the challenges that we want to put to a lot of the sponsors of these events, people like EC Vision, some of our service providers who are the labs, some challenges that we continue to face that, we are quite excited that they have started to talk to each other to provide us a platform that allows us to manage compliance a bit more effectively than we have done in the past. So I want to, thank Thomas for recognizing that regulations are changing very quickly and we need systems that can help us address this now, not necessarily tomorrow. And from Spencer, I think it's very exciting to hear that some of the people that we hope to partner with in the future in the areas of sourcing have programs in place that give us that sort of good feeling that we are, in bed with the right partners who care about these topics as much as we do. So, CPSI and REACH. The first time it came about, CPSI as an example, as I was putting together this presentation, I was quite amazed about how few bullets I had for CPSI compared to maybe 5 years ago when I gave a presentation to my executive team trying to figure out what CPSI was all about. I remember the first call we had with another group, and I was asked to join the call on behalf of New Balance. And during that call, every other brand on the call had lawyers, but I was by myself. So at the end of the call, I was asked to brief my executive team, and they said, "What did you learn?" I said, "First of all, I need my own lawyer." Secondly, we're not quite sure what the regulation means yet. We're still trying to interpret it. So with all these lawyers, we still couldn't quite figure out what CPSI was trying to accomplish. So this is probably one of the very few times you're going to hear someone say, "I think they did a great job in trying to draft a regulation based on the circumstances that we had at the time." And I'm going to put a little bit of context to what the CPSI tried to accomplish. Now, maybe they may have gone a bit overkill, but at least there was a crisis of confidence at that time that the CPSI had to address. And sometimes we forget this in our criticism of that regulation. So, CPSI, in 2008, what was happening in the US market? You were seeing a lot of recalls for toys. In the global markets, parents were scared to go buy toys for their kids. This is the environment in which the CPSI had to step in to sort of stem that tide where, people were not so afraid to go into the stores to buy a product. I remember very clearly, I think it was Walmart, at the checkout counter, they had an XRF gun. So you can bring your toy and they will zap it and tell you there is no lead in it, so you can buy it. But that was really that environment. You had the Mattel recalls, and you had other recalls at that point in time that the industry was dealing with. And what CPSI tried to do was sort of evolve a lot of the regulations that were already on the books. So it applied to children's product. But it had in it provisions to address certain chemicals like lead, reinforce the toy standards that should have been enforced a while ago. It had also a component of it which was perhaps the most confusing and challenging for those of us in sourcing, which was the third-party testing and product certification. The tracking labels were also a necessity because of some of the embarrassing situations on TV where these CEOs of the organization were asked questions in Congress. So do you know where the products were made? Well, we're not quite sure at this point in time. Well, do you know what products you need to recall? Well, we're still trying to figure out what was contaminated or not contaminated. So the need for the third-party testing, the certification, but more or less telling you or the supplier where the product was made and the fact that the products complied with the standards, was a necessity. And then the tracking labels, which sort of help to contain any type of recall situations should they be in that, in that predicament. Civil and criminal penalties, this was my most favorite part in my communication to my executive team. There was that line in there, the executives will go to jail, not me. It's just my job to interpret the regulation, but it's your job to make sure that I had funding and that I was doing the right thing, but I don't know how you're going to figure that part out. And so that probably was the scariest part for some of the people I was presenting to, and it was really in very bold letters, very, very bold letters. And then the searchable database of reports of harm. And I think those are the things, or that's the evolution of the CPSI. And if we want to be honest with ourselves, in situations where we've run into problems, and I think, Spencer keyed in very correctly when he said we had a responsibility for that visibility in our supply chain. And in areas where we have had or we have found ourselves failing for CPSI, it's really very embarrassing to find out that you have a product that has failed, that you thought was made in the Philippines, but it's really made in Vietnam. And what happened was somehow it got transferred to Vietnam without, the bombs being updated, and they ran out of ink, probably on the night shift, and the factory manager knew a guy who he drinks with, who also sells ink. So they went down the street real quickly to buy ink, and that happened to be the item that was caught at customs. How likely is that scenario to happen in any supply chain? But we're finding that it does happen quite a lot. So the ability to present to the CPSI that you have this under control, that you understand what the issues are, I think helps your conversation with them when they determine what civil and criminal penalties you're going to be faced with. So that's CPSI in a nutshell. Again, like I said, 5 years ago when I gave this presentation, it was 20-page presentation. At the end, we still was not quite sure what we're going to test and how we're going to test. And those are some of the challenges that I'm going to go into during my presentation is what and how to test. How do we communicate what was tested, and how do we figure out what needs to be tested or when those reports need to be updated? How do we connect all the different platforms that each and every one of us here works with in our different companies so that we're seeing exactly the same picture at any point in time? Rich, I'm still trying to figure this one out, and that's why I like the CPSI a bit better. It was just one hard stop, and then you have to work your way around it. With Rich, every year my team gives me an update, and it keeps evolving. But it's hard to go ask for resources with an evolving regulation because resources are very scarce and there are different priorities every year. So if I'm trying to help my sourcing team plan for 5 years out, well, is that truly a priority right now? I mean, are we going to get caught tomorrow on this piece versus CPSI says you need to test right now, and if you can't test, you can't ship. Absolutely, we're going to test. What do you need to test? But with REACH, it's still evolving, and it's registration, evaluation, authorization of chemicals. That's the full acronym. It's got, part of the agenda or the goal was to streamline a lot of the EU legislation. For example, some of the RSL regulations, streamline them into one global or one EU, standard. There is the provision for, SVHCs, substances of very high consent. Apparently that list stands at 151 now. When I last looked at this a couple of years ago, I think it was 18 SVHCs that was on the list at that time. So it continues to evolve, continues to give us new challenges. A couple of weeks ago, I was with a supplier who has a product they sell to us that could fall under SVHC. So my question is it registered? Is it evaluated? Is it qualified? He had one technical guy to give me one answer, and he had his lawyer on the other side to counterbalance the answer to say, well, that's what the technical guy says, but the lawyer thinks that this is what it really means. Then he had another guy to say, well, we think overall there won't be any problem. So at the end of the conversation, I still don't know if the product is good enough, but at least it solves the problem that I have at that point in time. You have the Article 33, communication in the supply chain. Like most of the brands here, you had a team ready to respond to customer requests if your product had any of the SVHCs in them. A big challenge, especially for our European business. Luckily, we didn't get a lot of letters. I'm sure for the other brands, you were also hoping that those letters didn't come. For those that we got, I think that a lot of the things that we had done as an organization with our RSL program, put us in a good position to be able to respond to a lot of these issues. So CPSI and REACH truly happened at that point in time when, as an organization, we had realized that we had an opportunity with product chemistry, trying to understand the type of chemicals that are used in our product. So they all came in at that time when we were implementing our RSL programs, and it helped to drive those programs, in the way we felt it had to be done correctly. As a private company, we have sort of maybe a different reach. We have a different set of agendas or motivators that drive our ability to execute. If my owner feels very passionately about a topic, well, he's going to put his money where his mouth is. And he felt very passionately about, product chemistry. And we really went out to try to get this under control. So, you have a picture of some of the products that we make as a brand. So you have hockey sticks, you have hockey gloves, lacrosse gloves, helmets, shoes, water bottles, apparel, accessories. Now, as a compliance team, what do you test? And how do you test? When CPSI came on board, a lot of these products were labeled, some of them was for our kids' program. But if you look at the hockey stick as an example, that's a pretty expensive product to make, or that helmet. And to do a destructive test on those type of products can get very expensive quickly. So you look at the items in red are areas of concern that we had to test for, so the screen printing on them. Now, in the very early stages of CPSI, one of our service providers recommended that we get them 100 hockey sticks to scrape the paint out so that they could do the testing. Now, if you know how to make hockey sticks and you know how much it costs, scrapping 100 hockey sticks is not a practical approach to compliance. So that didn't quite work for us. Scrapping 100 helmets was not going to work for us in any way. So from the beginning, what we did at New Balance was to try to figure out a way to have a practical approach to managing compliance. So our early read of the CPSI was really based on a reasonable testing approach before they even clarified that as a strategy. But we felt then that we had to do something that made sense to us, that was practical, but ensure that we were doing the right thing at the end of the day. So we had, questions that we're asking. And the challenge for this room is to say, for our service providers, both IT, the testing labs, is help us ask the right questions that gives us the cost of compliance if we don't do the right thing, and the cost of compliance if we do the right thing in the areas of, I have them listed up there, leveraging the RSL approach, number one. And in our vendor qualification process, do we know who our suppliers are? Are we working with the right suppliers? So beyond the tier 1, who are the metal suppliers? The tier 3, who are the chemical suppliers? Do we know who they are? And if we know who those suppliers are, does that reduce our cost eventually? Because at the end of the day, it's all risk management. So if I know who those upstream suppliers are and they have gone through some sort of qualification process, then it's a bit easier to approach this in a different manner than just testing every purchase order. So looking at those items there, we quickly recognized that we needed to figure out who the screen printing suppliers were, where they were buying their inks and paints. If I force them to buy from certain suppliers that I have qualified and I have an agreement with, and I can track those purchases by PO from New Balance, then our risk is significantly mitigated. And I can test maybe at the model or the style level, or do a screenshot on a different type of item, test those inks and qualify those inks. Those were some of the things as an organization that we did, qualifying the tier 2, the tier 3 supply base, and then rolling that up to the tier 1 suppliers. What are the challenges here? If I don't have a good IT platform that allows me to see my tier 1 supplier, the bill of materials, and the upstream suppliers that he's using, then it's a paperwork maze that I have to try to make work. And that's where the difficulty comes in. And that's the challenge. And that's the conversation I hope that this presentation spurs. And I know Thomas is driving a lot of that conversation with his EasyVision platform, trying to connect both the testing lab, the tier 2 suppliers, the tier one suppliers and giving the brand that visibility that is needed. So now I've gone through the testing area. How do we track what was tested, what needs to be updated? So I have a system, I'm sure like everyone else, where on one end I manage RSL and all the reports coming from my labs into my system. The idea behind that system is that it allows me to track if there are any regulation updates, what's the overall impact to my supply chain. So if they decide to lower the lead limits to 50 ppm, I can quickly tell you in about 5 minutes, in the last 3 to 5 years, how many failures I've had for lead, which suppliers are those, have I seen an increase or a decrease, am I still working with those suppliers? But I can target my improvements and my risk to those suppliers to drive training, to drive my audit, and to spend my testing dollars a bit more effectively. When do the reports expire, and what notice do I get that those reports are expired? Beyond those, you have old styles. You have a lot of the classics coming back. So we have the marketing group who have their own systems. There's a new need for new classics to come back into the market. Well, it's a great idea. It's going to sell a lot of shoes, as an example. But those suppliers who made those shoes back then may not be part of our supply chain now. And if they still are, we have not really been there in a long time because we didn't think we were going to use those suppliers anymore. Product transfers, multiple manufacturing locations. So now there's a new trend of developing in one country, producing or manufacturing in another country. When those products move, there is a compliance challenge to managing the suppliers that were used for development is now a different supplier that was used for production. It may be the same supplier, but it's a different manufacturing location. So in location A, they have very good systems. In location B, they have a very friendly general manager who knows everybody, who's his cousin, who does something that helps get my products out quicker, may not be compliant, but it's cheaper. And those are the type of activities that we continue to be challenged with. 1 year versus 2 years versus 3-year validity of the reports. Well, it's our belief that testing should tell us what we already know. It's not something to tell us what we don't already know. So we want to be able to predict, the results that we see in our testing programs. So we have evolved our testing approach now to include a certification of the Tier 2 and the Tier 3 suppliers. So we're requiring that they go beyond product compliance, beyond RSL, beyond sustainability, that they are keyed into a lot of these new innovative ideas of manufacturing, of product compliance, things like the Blue Science certification as an example, Oikotex, etc. Those are things that we want our suppliers to be thinking about, ways to manage our overall risk. Licensees. For each of the brands here, that's an area that we all remain very challenged with. A couple of years ago, you had the licensee manager fly into Asia, had a nice dinner with some guy who could make about everything that he wants to make. He wants to make a baseball hat, he can make it. He wants to make a baseball stick, he can make it. A hockey stick, helmet, everything this guy could do. They had a nice dinner, signed a contract, and he got back on the plane. Everything is done. Well, we can't do that anymore. And that's, some of the changes as an organization we had to go through. So we have a system now where we want to make sure we're partnered with the right licensees. And part of that process involves auditing the licensee partner, so looking at what Spencer presented. If we were auditing, Lianfeng as a partner for licensee, we would want to see their compliance programs, how they manage their supply chain, how they qualify their suppliers, how they deal with failures when they have failures, because there are going to be failures in the supply chain. How is all that managed? Is it documented? Is there a team to do that? And then when they get to the product, how is that product qualified? Those are the things we are auditing our licenses to do. And then part of our reasonable testing is that we reserve the right to pick up samples at any time in production to audit, test, to make sure that they are doing what they say that they are doing based on a review of their documentation. One global standard versus regional standard. This is always a challenge for compliance managers when you're communicating up. Well, Europe doesn't want it. Can we ship it to somewhere else where they don't have the same type of regulations? Well, with CPSI, which is one of the things that I liked, is if it failed in the US, you couldn't ship it anywhere. They would seize the container. So it was a very easy debate. But, with the other regulations, you begin to get into that gray area. And then the practicality of the compliance teams. Are they people who sit in the office and just want to fail everything? Do they understand business and the challenges of sourcing? Have they been in the factories? Do they understand the true cost of compliance? One of the things we tried to build early on was making sure that our compliance teams understood the business of making product, and so that whatever strategies they came up with, it fit into our overall, sourcing strategy. I think, lastly, communication platforms and alignment. You have PLM systems, PDM systems, standalone systems, lab systems, chemical supplier systems, the raw material, the screen printing guys, the shoe factories, the transportation people as well, where we have to submit some of this documentation, and of course, the retail customers. How do we link this entire communication platform so that when a regulation changes, throughout my supply chain, upstream, downstream to the customers, I'm able to see the impact of that regulation. I'm able to meet the requirements of the regulation and communicate up downstream, down to my customers, what we have done as a brand to meet those requirements. And my hope is that people like Thomas are building us that platform that connects all of these areas together. This is just one example of those standalone systems where we have an external facing communication platform for the CPSI where retailers and customers can go in there, enter the style information, PO number, and get the certificate of compliance. But this is just one tool. I've got another tool that takes the report from last and puts it in another database. I've got another tool that the Tier 1 have to enter their information into. I've got a PDM tool, a PLM tool. I've got so many tools, and yet they cannot communicate with each other, so I have to keep looking at different systems to be able to make a decision. Being able to have that visibility, we think, is critical as we go forward in managing compliance in our supply chain. And then beyond compliance, my new bosses. You've got the roadmap to zero, you've got the NGOs, and you've got the best practices. These are the realities of the supply chain that we have to contend with. What does it mean by 2020 to be compliant to zero? What does it mean when you have an NGO who has an opinion of how supply chains should be run? May not be based on anything about reality or practicality, but it's a belief system. How does that line up with my sourcing strategy? And you have the best practices. It's an all-encompassing term. It includes consultants, true best practices, etc. So that's why we are all taking numbers to be able to get that new idea. But that's the end of my presentation, and I hope that we've been able to spark some questions and ideas for our service providers on how to link all these different areas for us as a brand. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Tex, for the very informative and insightful presentation. Seems the key to CPSIA and REACH, or the key to tackling that, is visibility and traceability and having one proper system in place to support you. And so far it's quite impressive to see what New Balance has implemented with regards to that. So moving on to our next presentation, we're going to see some of the challenges facing the apparel industry, being the lack of aligned standards and the many diverse initiatives. So I'd like to welcome André to come and present a bit more about one of the approaches that some of the US brands and retailers have implemented with regards to that.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for calling for putting me on stage. I would like to talk to you about the challenges of product safety. So it looks very simple, and you send it to the lab, and you've got very consistent results. The reality is a bit different. We have done an exercise with major labs, and we sent them samples of leather. And the question for the labs was, is there a coating, yes or no? So very basic question. If there's a coating, then we need to test lead in coating for CPSIA. If no coating, then no test, okay? Simple, simple. 5 labs says there is coating, 5 labs says no coating, okay? So we bring all the labs in one room and we say, okay, you'd better get a line, but we could not. So we talk to the lab and say, well, is it okay if we talk to CPSC to get their input on this? And they say yes. So we went to CPSC and we say, there's a bit of disagreement, and so can you get all a line? And that's what they've done. So even on CPSIA, we see testing is done in a bit different way by different labs. Tex talked about Greenpeace and zero discharge. We also see some gaps here. Most of the brands and retailers test with one method. Greenpeace is testing with another method. So to get to zero, if we don't test the same way, we're going to end up in trouble. Spencer talked about ICTI and other industry and getting more organized, and we look at another industry, we look at electronics industry, which is about $1 billion industry, and they're very organized. They have a standard body for standards. So IEEE is creating all standards for electronics. So that's where the people from Samsung and Google and everybody works together. They've got 425,000 members in 160 countries. So that all these electronics guys working together to set standards. We are bigger, actually, than the electronics industry, but we are not very organized. Our industry is very fragmented. There's a lot of initiatives, and there's a lot of common standards. And we talked about this with a question on social compliance earlier today. What is interesting is when you create this group is the idea of competition. So it's cooperation and competition. So Samsung and Google, for example, they work together to create the standards, but at the same time they compete. And that's what we need for industry, which is we all want to compete, we all want our brands to be better than the guys, but there's a time that we need to sit down and cooperate. So in this spirit, we created GAFTI. We've got about 43 corporate members and we represent the whole supply chain from chemical companies to brands, retailers. We have a combined turnover of $60 billion, and we cover product safety, social compliance, and sustainability. We have an annual general meeting soon on the 3rd of April, and so that's the list of some of the speakers we'll have. So Rob Sinclair from Li & Fung, Edwin Kay, that somebody of you know from HK Retail, Jason KB from Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which is becoming more and more standard for industry, Jan Spalding from Elevate, Peter Brough from FSC, from a database point of view, because as it was discussed before, database is getting more and more important, and some of our leaders, Phil Paul from Under Armour, Chris Tam from Sears, and Anderson Lee from Non-Woven Fabric. And so what we'd like to say to you is we'd like you to join us, for us to work together and work to align on standards. And then at the very least, we'd like you to ask your labs to work with SOPs that we've developed. So when we develop a SOP, even if you're not a member of GAFTI, you can go on the website, you can get it for free, and you can ask your lab to use it. If you don't ask your lab to use it, they will not use it. Okay, so if you want to reduce variation between labs, and would ask the brand and retailers to ask the testing lab to adopt the SOPs that we create. Okay, that's it. And so that's contact information if you have more questions. I'll be here throughout the day. Kitty Mann is also a key leader at GAFTI. John Wong in the back also. So if any question from you, I'll be happy to answer.
Great, so we could take any questions from the group. I think that we heard about standardization. So first, we hear from Spencer that standardization across the industry would be time-saving, cost-saving for everyone. And then we hear that theme again from both of you is talking about this global standard and then an industry-wide standard and trying to set that. So any questions from the audience? I know we stand between you and break. So, questions? Great. Anything for further comment from the panel? Fabrice?
Well, I have one question.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I have one question for Jeff. So it's still very local to Hong Kong. Are there any plans to establish any cooperation overseas to generate a global solution?
Yes, so the GFT is probably meeting in Hong Kong now, but we're looking to expand. All the meetings are face-to-face now, and that's a limitation because it's everybody happening to in Hong Kong. Fortunately, we have some of our leaders that moved back to the US. So Tom Nelson moved back to the US, Craig Dana moved back to the US. So hopefully we can create groups in different parts of the world. So if you are not based in Hong Kong and you'd like to be involved, then we're looking for leaders. I'm always looking for leaders.
We have time for more. Do you have more for your panel or?
Sure.
Audience, yes?
Hi, Tex and Andre, thank you for your presentations. My question is to Tex. You mentioned that, destroying those hockey sticks and scraping the paint off and all of that kind of stuff and destroying 100 helmets, that's not a good way of doing compliance and testing. And that you said that it's better to engage and realize where things are actually coming from. And it's actually more cost effective that way. Has New Balance done any studies on how that kind of engagement compared to the traditional way of kind of like a tremendous amount of testing and stuff like that? So more upstream engagement compared to compliance and testing extensively, the costs and benefits of those two methodologies. Is there any kind of study that New Balance has done?
Yes, and our RSL program was designed around engagement with the Tier 2 and the Tier 3 suppliers. When we first put together the first proposal we got from our service provider, without being too specific about numbers, the average cost of compliance would have been about $2 million a year to test as much as as much as the recommendation from our service provider was telling us we needed to test. In the eventual execution of the program, in terms of training, consolidating our suppliers, driving to a closed spec system, working with the chemical suppliers to narrow down the number of choices that the shoe factories had, as an example, we came out of that implementation at less than $250,000. So that's a huge saving. So where we had a check for as much as we would have needed at that point in time, but as a compliance team, it sort of made us feel good to be able to, present that we had a cost savings as part of the sourcing organization. So, in terms of our approach, we have seen a lot of cost benefit to working upstream with the suppliers than just going through a testing-based approach.
Just a follow-up question. So you said that rather than testing, the original compliance methodology cost you $2 million.
Should have cost us
$2 million as compared to the new way of doing it, which would have cost you $250,000.
Yeah.
Okay, but then from your sourcing team, by actually requesting certain chemicals, etc., that would have actually increased your sourcing cost, or your, I would assume, anyway, because you're using better chemicals, it may have actually increased the cost of the product. But I was just wondering if the 1.75 million you've saved in compliance was actually far greater than the amount that you had to pay.
That's a
for
very
the
good
quota.
question. And I have the, one of my mentors at New Balance used to always say, save them money and keep them out of jail. So I have the responsibility of those two jobs, where I keep them out of jail in my product compliance role and save them a lot of money on the sourcing side of business. Well, the suppliers that we partnered with are great global companies with excellent local services. And so by driving my volumes to these suppliers, we're able to negotiate, on a platform as a brand rather than the individual factories going out to do those negotiations. And part of that required us to understand really the inputs that goes into making those products, whether it's chemicals. What do we agree as a company and you as a company to track as a cost driver? Is it oil prices? Is it high prices? Is it benzene prices? What do we agree and where do we set a baseline? So, on the sourcing side, we did see a lot of savings. Beyond that, we built a significant strategic partnerships with this core supply base, and our volumes became a bit more important than they were years back, where it was very fragmented by the individual tier one managing those relationships. So, net, I think we came out maybe ahead, better than we anticipated, but it takes a lot of commitment to drive business that way and put the resources to manage those type of activities.
Hi, Tex. Chris Bresnay from Dick's Sporting Goods. Speaking in terms of engaging at Tier 2 and beyond, one of the challenges we see is maintaining an accurate supplier database.
Yep.
Can you speak to some of the challenges that you've had and maybe some key learnings to help you overcome those obstacles?
I think, one of the, I think it was Spencer who talked about the guy from Hasbro, and our vice president of development at that time, luckily, just came from Hasbro. And he had that vision that, what happened in the toy industry was going to come to our industry, and we needed to get ready. So it all came down to building a system that said every input that goes into the finished product must go through a qualification cycle, a gate, if you will. And that gate requires product compliance as the key step. So if I have a product that I make, and I know every supplier that I use in making that product, every time a bill of material is issued against that product, there is a cycle that runs through my system that says, has that product been validated for compliance? Are all the test reports still valid in the system? And if it's not, it stops the PO. And then there's an alert sent back to the right teams to go back and either reapprove those materials or not. So it requires being able to upload your supply chain into your system and your specs being, if you will, visible to both the tier one and us as a brand. And then being able to manage those suppliers. Now, what's the benefit for the supplier? They also help us monitor this compliance because they know what styles we're going to make. And if they don't get the order, they send an email to us. Hey, I saw this shoe on the shelf. I didn't get any orders for that, but I know I'm on the spec. Back to the tier one. What's going on here? And I think we've had one or two very good examples that have helped change the behavior of trying to cheat the system. The cost for that tier one does not justify the savings that they're going to get by trying to cheat our system. But we continue to monitor it very closely. You're welcome.
That's all we do. That's all we have time for right now. Not when I don't need a microphone.
And so I'm going to invite everyone to, let's thank our speakers.
If you were confused before, you'll be confused now. So we actually were putting together, knowing that the China GP and the shifting and the changes in China GP are so impactful on the industry today. We put together a panel. We dragged people to say, please come talk about the China GP, because we need these experts who really know this industry. So I'll introduce first on my left is Kitty Man with VF Corporation. Katie Lo, AT is with China Vesta in the Shenzhen office. And also Carissa Mock is our moderator, and she's with DC Vision. So first I'll let you take over. Presentation slides are theirs, and then who's first? Kitty or KT? KT. You.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this seminar. I'm Carissa Mock from DC Vision. It's my pleasure to be a moderator of this panel session on China's changing regulations. So first of all, may I briefly introduce our guest speaker today. Mr. KT Lo, he is the Technical Director of China Tester Shenzhen Testing Services Company Limited and Principal Consultant of its Hong Kong office. Since 2003, he is an assessor of the Hong Kong Laboratory Accreditation Scheme of the Hong Kong Accreditation Service. And our second speaker is Dr. Kitty Man, and she is the Senior Product Safety Manager in VF Asia's Product Stewardship and Sustainability Department based in Hong Kong. And her primary focus is the implementation of VF Product Safety Program in Asia for all VF brands. So, go back to our topics today, China's changing regulation. To enter the China market, what are the regulations we have to follow and what the brand have to pay attention? So I think this should be questions for a lot of brands here. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our first speaker, Mr. KT Lo.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very much honored today for having the opportunity for talking to such a distinguished group of guests. The topic today is the textile standards and regulation for China market. My presentation will be split into 3 sessions. Firstly, I will introduce some knowledge about the textile standards in China. And then, secondly, how compliance could be achieved. And thirdly, the government and non-government organizations that would involve in checking the quality and what shall they do if non-conformance is found. So we move on to the textile standards in China. For textile standard in China, it can be in 4 levels. The top of the level is the national standard, prefixed by GB. So we often see such standard as GB 1H401, GBT 29H62, etc. So what is the meaning of GB and GBT? I wish to first give you some idea. GB is the acronym for 国标, that is the phonetic, meaning national standard. And if you can see the T, actually it means in China, 推 is the meaning recommended. So whenever you see GB alone, this is important because that means this is mandatory. If you can see GBT, that means this is the recommended standard. Next of the level is the trade. That means if there's no national standard, the trade will compile with their standard. This is prefixed by FZ. So this means this is 纺织. 纺织 is textile in English. So for those footwear and leather, this belongs to the light industry. So in Chinese is 轻工. 轻工 therefore is QB. I give the example here is FEZT 73018. This is the recommended textile standard for the woolen sweater. So in this standard, you can find the detailed specification required for woolen sweater for sales in China. For local, this is prefixed by DB, and this is 地方. And for enterprise, is 企业. 企业 is therefore prefixed by Q. So for the national trade and local standards, you can have the mandatory and recommended standard. For mandatory, compliance is a must. You have to comply with this standard. And I shall list to you those mandatory standards required for the textile products on sales in China. And for the recommended standard, there is a misconception that this is voluntary, then I may opt not to comply. But actually, this is not true for two reasons. One is that some recommended standards are coded by the mandatory standard, just like the X6, X5. This standard is the symbol for use in the care label. Although this carries a T, that means the recommended standard, but you have to comply with it because this is coded by another standard, GB 5296.4, which is the mandatory standard. Therefore, this will, although it's a recommended standard, has become a mandatory standard. And secondly, for example, you are having the woolen sweater, FEZT 73018. This is a recommended standard. But if you adopt this standard in the pass certificate or hand tag, then it's like you sign a contract with the consumer that your product is compliant with the standard FCZT 73018. Then this is legal binding. If you are not do not comply with that, then you appear to be deceiving the consumer, and therefore you are not complying with the law. For enterprise standard, there's a requirement that its requirements must be higher in standard than the existing product standard. So these are the company applied mandatory standard we enforced today. So for the standard, it can be fundamental, method, and products. Fundamental, it means that there's some standardization of the product names. For example, there are many types of leather, and there's a standard to standardize the name of the leathers. And also, for method, for example, peeling, you have got a standard for testing peelings. But for most apparel practitioner, the product standard is of the most concern to them, because you have to choose the right standard for your product, and then to comply with that standard in order that you are able to be said to be conforming with the regulation. Actually, for apparel standard, you can find it in a website here, free of charge. You can download the entire standard free of charge from this website. Here are the examples of some woven products. And here are the example of some knitted products. So you have to choose from tens of them in order to find the right product standard for your product. But because of the mandatory standard GB 5296.4, so you can find in the garments at their care label, which is those permanent labels shown on the garment, you can find the 3 types of information because this is stipulated to be necessary for indication under GB 5296.4. First is the size. For size, you do not mention, you do not use X, M, and S like that, but you have to use the Chinese system. That is the body height, burst curve, and then the type of body. And then you have to indicate the fiber composition and also the care label. In addition to that, you have to use the hand tag to give more information. Brands, product names, product code. Product code is the product standard I mentioned. And then the compliant safety code. There's a very famous GB 1X401. Give the 8 types of tests you have to comply. And the category of the product. And for category B, that means those garments direct in contact with the skin. You have to mention the quality class and the fiber composition, company details, the style, and the size. So with that, we can move on to the second part. That is how you have to comply with the requirements. The first thing you have to comply with are the mandatory standard in force. For the textile products, I give the relevant mandatory standard 2. The first one is the GB 5296.4 I mentioned before. This is the information you have to give on the permanent label and hand tag. And on that standard, it has 2 other standards. The first one is the FZ 01053. This is the standard for fiber contents. And you may note that the standard has been upgraded to a national standard. And this is now called GBT 29X62. And it will be implemented in May this year. And then another standard quoted by the mandatory standard GB 5296.4 is the GBT X65X5. This is the symbol for use in the care label. You should not use the American label on your care label. You have to follow this standard. Of course, you have to comply with the GB 1X401, which are the type of tests you have to pass for your garment for safety reasons. So besides the mandatory standard, you have to also to comply with the product standard. For example, if your product is shirt, you may follow the GBT 2660. Or if you do not follow this, you can choose other local or enterprise standard, but they must be suitable. For example, towel, you have to follow FCT 62006. The third thing you have to comply with is the If your product is the functional product, then you have to follow the technical guideline. For example, for ecology textile, you have to follow GBT 18885, like that. You have to follow this standard. So here are some hints for compliance. But because of the time limitation, I'm not going to talk about this in detail. But for those interested, you can have separate session to tackle this. Let me move on to the third part of my presentation, which is the quality inspection body. There are government and non-government organizations involved in checking the quality. For the government bodies, the CIQ and AQSIQ and SAIC are those organizations involved in the quality check. For import and export merchandise, this is under the jurisdiction of the CIQ. CIQ are the Custom, Immigration, and the Quarantine Bureau. And they will check on the import and export commodity. For export commodity, normally they will accept the standard, the buyer's requirements. And for the import, they will follow the local product standard in China. And for those goods circulated in domestic market, this is under the jurisdiction of SAIC for those on sales in the shop. That means they will contract testing institution to go into the shop to get samples and test to see the conformance. And HQSIQ can also go into the factory to check for the quality during the production stage. So besides the government organization, there are non-government organizations involved, noticeably the Consumer Association. They will use the consumer production law as weapon, and if not found to be conforming, then those operators are liable for enhanced compensation for the consumer's loss. There's a new revised version of the law to be implemented in March this year. So they will have under Article 55 saying that the amount of enhanced compensation would be 3 times the price of goods or services. And if the amount of the enhanced compensation does not reach 500 RMB, then the amount would be 500 RMB. So that means no matter how cheap or even the good is for giving out, they will be liable of a minimum fine of 500 RMB. And because of this, that would attract private companies and individuals who may go to your shop to buy some goods and claim for compensation under the Consumer Production Law. That means if they find something wrong, they can claim for enhanced compensation. If a garment is costing 10,000, then they will get 30,000. So this concludes my presentation today, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Low. And now I think everybody got some ideas what are the mandatory standard and product standard to comply with in China. So if you are a brand, what the measure to adopt to cope with those China's regulation, and what the point of view from the brand. So please welcome our second speaker, Dr. Man.
So good morning. I'm so glad that this time I don't have to talk about RSL, product safety, or testing. I'm given a very interesting topic, which is China. And I know that I'm the last one to speak before lunch, so I'll just make sure I have only 4 slides, then we can go for lunch on time. Yeah. Okay. So let me start by asking you the question because I'm not so tall, so let me walk around. Let me first start by asking you a question. How many of us here are either making products for China or selling products in China or have a plan to sell products in China? Put up your hands. Only a few. Okay, not that much, that's fine. So for those of us who are doing business in China, what do you think about this GB? Is it something easy to manage or is it confusing or is it a headache? What do you think? Easy? Confusing? Headache? Don't know what to do? Well, I think the law by itself is not easy. There are so many laws in China, and just then Katie mentioned to us, there are so many different regulations, so many different types of standards and requirements, and by putting all this together in Chinese would be very difficult for non-Chinese speaking persons. And I guess that's one of the reasons why we all thought that GB is a very difficult topic to deal with. So what I'm going to talk today basically is from a brand perspective. If you're not too sure what is VF is an apparel and footwear company. We have over 30 brands. To name a few, we have the North Face, Timberland, Wrangler, Lee, etc. So we sell a lot of products in China. We face problems as well. I spend quite a lot of time to tackle all this problem. And I think by what I learned so far, it may be good for me to share some insights with you so we can all learn together. The first point that I put on this slide, you may think is kind of like interesting. The first piece of advice that I give to you if you're selling products in China, know what you are going to sell. Sound interesting? You may say, how come I will have no idea what I'm going to sell in China? Surely I know. Well, the reason why I put this point is because just then, again, Katie mentioned, there are so many different product requirements. I was looking at one of the slides. For knitted garment, wool knitted garment, you have one standard. Cashmere knitted garment, you have another standard. Low wool knitted garment, something like that, you have another standard. So basically, each type of product, you have your own standard. And then add on to that, there is a product safety standard, product safety law. So what I see is for each product put on the market, at least there are 2 types of requirements or regulations that product has to comply with. So if you have no idea what you're selling, it will be extremely difficult for you to know what requirement I have to look into and what should I do. So that's the reason why I put that as a first point. The second challenge, I would say this, sometimes people would say, well, this product is a global product. I'm selling in US, I'm selling in EU, I'm going to sell in China as well, I'm selling in Japan and Korea. It meets all the RSL, CPSIA REACH requirement, but then when the product hit the China port, it got rejected by the CIQ, and all of a sudden this product has to go back to the original port. Why? Have you ever experienced something like that? Or have you ever heard about something similar? Well, product good for other market may not necessarily fit for China market as well. Again, because of these different product requirement law. So take an example. Denim pants, good is already in the US market, already in the EU market. Some music, which is nice. Okay, the denim pants is already in EU, selling in US, and now it's shipping to China. Hit Shanghai port, then CIQ, Katie again just mentioned, CIQ did the check and said, no, your product is not good for China market. Maybe because of color facets issue. Then the products have to go back. But you may say, but wait a second, it's a denim. It's deemed to fail, the color is deemed to come off. What do you mean? And then this ties back to the first point. You need to know what you are selling. Because we know that from our experience, there are certain type of products basically you may not be able to put on China market. Something that is called maybe string to fit. Have you ever heard about products like that? Originally, it's a loose fit product, but when you put on it, if you sit in a bathtub, it will just shrink to your body fit, to body size. Products like this, or products that are deemed to have color come out, these products basically you may not be able to put on the market because of the China requirement. And for some very, very light fabric, which we know they may tear off, they may tear very easily, it's a design. It's a design. We love that design, but because of the China law, we may not be able to put on the market just because the product cannot meet the requirement. So if you're doing business in China, you would need to know what you're selling, and you need to know the quality of your product, because even the design may just put you into trouble. Okay. The other piece is marketing strategy. Some brands go to China market, they said, well, I target myself as a super premium brand. I want to have first class or premium class labeled it on the warranty card or the hand tag. But has this piece of information from the brand ever communicated back to the supply chain? That's a big question mark. Because again, when you look at the product standard, there are different class, different category. You have premium class, you have first class, you have conformity class. By having these classes, basically the requirement is not the same. At one point, the brand wants something super premium, but however, the information was not cascaded back to the supply chain. Supply chain has no clue. I only know you want this product. Eventually, they may make something at the conformity class, but then since the information on the warranty card is put as premium class or first class, then you are labeling something that your products do not fit into that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that is a very important piece of information. If you are a brand, you need to know where you want to go. What is your standpoint? And that warranty card or that hand tag, it is not just a piece of paper. It is not just a piece of paper. The information on it is super critical. Few errors, few wordings are wrong, you will in trouble. Trust me, we have case like that. I'm not saying this is not making sense. It makes a lot of sense. Basically, think about it. If you're the consumer, you go to the market, you buy some products, you look at the warranty card, you want to know what is this product comply to, and what is the class of that product. And it was so interesting. There was one point I went shopping as well. You can imagine. The information put on the warranty card, not VF brands, but some other brands, was so wrong that even me, when I go there to take a look, I said, oh my gosh, it's totally wrong. So if the AIC, the government people, when they do the market surveillance, they don't even have to pick the products, go back to test. They just need to look at the warranty card, say, oh, goose, wrong. Penalty. That is the situation. So you need to have good products. You also need to have very correct information on your warranty card. One more point is if we are making a product functional claim, such as wrinkle-free, antibacterial, or UV protection product claim, you need to make sure you have enough information to back up the claim. And for example, recently we are trying to develop a product with antibacterial finishing function with a chemical company. They have special hand tag for us to put on the product so that the consumer will say, okay, this is from this chemical company with this antibacterial finishing function. But guess what? That function basically do not meet with the China requirement. So if I put that label or that particular hand tag from the chemical company on my China product, basically I'm misrepresenting. It just do not meet the requirement. So if you're having products like this, make sure you check with all these experts in here to make sure that the chemical company, the information provides you, good for global market, but still comply with China market. So all in all, just to summarize, again, same point, know what you're selling and make sure there is thorough communication from the brand to the sourcing team and to the supply chain so we get what we expected. And most critical point, since we all know GB China law is difficult, it's not so easy to understand, always seek technical advice. So CTTC and GTT will be a great example for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions or for the panel that were prepared or no?
No.
It's okay. So we'd like to take questions from the audience first. So we've heard from the complexity once again of the China GP and changing and shifting. Also, I think Kitty alluded to the fact that we don't operate in a bubble, right? So that enterprise needs to really be cross-functional across all of our teams. Otherwise, we're going to get caught. So we'll take questions. I see you have one.
I have a question around if you're just trading or trying to sell a product online through an online channel only. How is that governed in terms of product compliance and if our product is, compliant?
Yeah, thank you for the question. For the China on sales online, actually you have to comply with the standards. But because peculiar operations of this online, I must confess that there's a loophole. That means that when you have, if you have your warehouse in China, then somebody will go to check your product in the warehouse is complying with the standard or not. But your warehouse is outside China, for example in Hong Kong, then you are sending goods to China through some courier like that. Then in that case, that is not yet been checked, I know. But of course, this has been some attention of the various government departments. That may sooner or later there will be some action.
So it adds another perspective to the term Hong Kong is the gateway to China. So we'll be setting up a scene. Any other questions? How about you? Okay, yes, I was hoping someone from these brands that are selling internationally might also say, okay, we're entering the China market.
Hi. Regarding the complexity of the standards at a national level and at provincial level, I would like to know if there is a situation where there are different standards at a national level and a provincial level for the manufacturer. What standard do they need to comply?
So your question is that certain product may have different standard available for complying. Then what standard to take? Now this is a good question.
Yes, my question is, if there is a different standard for a product at a national level and at a provincial level, what does the manufacturer follow?
So as I mentioned that there's a hierarchy of standard. The top level is the national standard, and then the trade standard, and then the local standard, provincial. So if there's a standard, national standard available, then you have to follow the national standard. according to the hierarchy. And some enterprise may think that, for example, the national standard is too stringent. Some software manufacturers may find that their peeling cannot achieve easily. Then they may make their own standard, enterprise standard. But as I mentioned that this enterprise standard is lowest in the hierarchy. That means if there's available local standard or even or the trade standard available, then the CIQ or the SIAC will use the top higher level standard to overrule your standard, enterprise standard. For example, in the CIQ level for export or import commodity, some enterprise may use the enterprise standard, but they may be denied. They will say that this is not acceptable because they can easily find from your enterprise standard that some requirements are not higher in level than the existing trade standard or national standard. In that case, they will test according to the national standard and trade standard and not the enterprise standard. They may simply decline the enterprise standard. So in that case, our advice is for the choice of standard. Whenever there's a national or a trade standard, it's better to follow that. Is that okay?
Very detailed information. Thank you.
Anyone else with a question?
I'm just wondering, how often do these standards change? Sort of referencing back to Tex's presentation about REACH, which changes every year, every month. How about these types of regulations, and how do brands keep up with those changes?
I will answer the second part. How we keep updates with the changes. Basically, we relied on experts like them. Again, because there are so many standards in China, and I hate to say, I don't see a single platform that announced to the world, hey guys, we have a new standard. I don't see that happening right now. So that's why we're relying on them. And how often the standard updates, I don't think there is something like a regular pattern. If the authority sees a need to do the updates, and they will just do it. I guess that's my understanding.
So we are lucky because our organization also involved in the revising standard and compiling standard. Actually, this type of standard are updated regularly. So for the timeline, I don't think there's a fixed timeline. So whenever there's a need, national standard, there's various bodies to revise the standard, and also in the various trade will also compile their standard or introduce new standard or revise the existing standard. That's not a fixed schedule, but I would say that every 3 or 4 years there will be a revision.
I know you're all thinking more and more.
Exactly.
Now. Who's going to start selling in China? You're doing all right. All right, great. Questions? And we'll close out the panel. Thank you. Let's sit in the hands. So with pleasure, I'll advance our slides to show that we are moving some on.